to this computer. It says recording, so I think we're good.
Okay. Is everyone?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Hi, Emily.
Hi. All right, and everyone's sound is working, so that's good. Okay.
How do we want to do this?
Do you guys want to start with like the questions about the book first, or the questions about like ASD?
Let's do the ASD ones first, and if y'all want to just go in order that we appear on the top.
Well,
Okay.
I think it looks different for every person.
Yeah.
All right, well, I can start with the first question.
Okay.
All right, so this is an ASD one. My question to you guys was, based on the readings for this week, what are your thoughts on the representation of ASD with David? Does it coincide with these ideas of positivity and realism? Does it do a good representation for some readers, but maybe not others? And once we sort of like figure out what we think, then I sort of had this other thought of like sometimes will people feel represented and other people just won't? Like, is that just how the ball rolls sometimes? Like, sometimes people are going to relate and sometimes they won't. And do we just have to be sort of like okay with that idea? So I guess first let's start with sort of like, do you think that it coincides with those ideas of like realism and positivity, or do you think it wasn't a good representation?
I kind of had a question like that about the second article, I think, saying that it should focus on like strengths instead of their weaknesses.
Right.
And so with David, I think, and I don't know if this is just because it's from the perspective of his sister, but I feel like it's kind of focusing more, and I don't want to call it weaknesses, like his limits and what he
Right.
can't really do versus like what he is able to do on his own. At least
Right.
that's how I've kind of seen it reading it.
If I can add to that, Jenna, I think too, I really relate. Some of y'all know I have a younger brother, and so I really related to the sister as a narrator in this story. And I think sometimes it looks like she's kind of, examining it from that perspective that you were talking about, Jenna, because it's shown out of her frustration. So
Right.
sometimes it's like she's showing his limitations, but it's viewed through her lens of I'm frustrated about X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's like I drew a lot of parallels to Wonder from Rules in
Yeah,
a very similar way. So
Yeah, I
because
kind of agree, Jessica.
Sorry. One quick thing is like I feel like she needs representation too, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to sort of have that whole communal understanding of all these different people. But go ahead, Carrie.
Oh, I was just going to say that I kind of feel like David is one of the main characters, but Catherine is really the main character. So It's not like it's really about her, and her interactions with her brother a lot of the times for her are negative. So I kind of feel like it's not as positive because of that. Not that she like hates him or anything, but just because it's about, like Jessica said, it's about her frustrations, and kind of jumping to like the second part of what you were saying about the representation. I kind of feel like it could be like positive depending on, like, say if you're the sister or the family member of someone that has autism, maybe for you it is positive because it's like somebody else feels this way. It's not just me.
Right.
And it's not that like she still loves her brother. I still love my person, but I think it is like kind of does go across the board because like autism is so like complex and it's such a range that I feel like it's kind of like you said, you may not ever be able to really you can't really represent everyone in a way that they're going to relate to, because there's so many different levels, so many different aspects that may apply to you and not to everyone else. So not to jump too far ahead, but
I think that was like sort of like this jump I had to make with reading the articles, because I read the article from the girl who said like it angers me with the lack of authentic voices, and I read her article and I was like, oh, like I would be so frustrated if I was in her standpoint. And then but like I read like other books and I'm like, well, someone can relate to this, like maybe that is just the general goal, right? Like I mean, because even when, like y'all said, like, Catherine is the main character, you know, and she's 12 years old. Like, she's going to have, you know, qualms and moments of impatience with this. And some 12-year-old girl who has a brother with ASD can say, yeah, I can relate to that.
Mhm.
And likely with, you know, David or the mother or whoever. So I think it's, I don't know, I guess it's sort of just like, hopefully someone somewhere will
Mhm.
be like, yes, I relate to this. And if you don't, hopefully it's not like this, you know, I hate like the lack of representation. But I mean, it was hard with, given that article, I was sort of like, oh, I see where she's coming from. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think I was definitely biased towards Catherine, but I liked how they portrayed David as a person farther along on the spectrum. He wasn't this genius or a comic relief in the book. He actually had more severe disabilities than most books and movies show. So I personally like that. I like that it was a little bit negative, especially from her standpoint as a middle school girl. Boys are annoying, whether it's your sister or not, or brother or not. So I enjoyed that.
I think it is like an authentic representation of her as a 12-year-old girl, and like the whole dynamic with her and the new neighbor, Christy, and trying to like figure out like, oh, I really want her to be my best friend going into this whole new thing of middle school. And so I think that character was really well done in terms of that, going on the other side of Teresa's question with the representation.
I have a question that's kind of related to what Teresa asked. So do y'all care if I go ahead and ask that?
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so if you read further into the back of the book, the Q&A with the author, it reveals that she actually has a son with autism, and her daughter and she were like having a conversation about how she asked her mom, like, why are there no families like mine in the books that I read? And so that was what inspired Lord to write the book. And so I'm wondering, just based on especially last week's discussion in class, how we talked about parents and representations of families who have individuals in their family with ASD, I'm curious about what you guys think. Do you think that the representation of the parents in this book was a fair representation of a family with ASD? And do you think it was more accurate because it was written by a mom of someone who has a child with autism?
I kind of had something to go along with this. Did anyone else in like the very beginning think that the parents were divorced when like the dad was coming to pick up David and then okay, so I got that impression, and then like it's revealed that they actually are together and he just works really strange hours, and I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense for her getting to stay home with him all the time. But I had a kid in my student teaching last semester, and his parents are kind of similar, but like whenever they were together, they were always on a really united front for him. Like we had a Light It Up Blue for autism awareness, and they were both there, like in their little like, my superpower is I'm an autism parent, that kind of thing. So I just feel like that dynamic was a little, and I guess it's always different for each couple, but I felt it was a little bit just strained and just, I don't know. I feel like it is authentic in a way, but it also just felt very odd to have it kind of that he's not there for the kids. So
I kind of felt like Catherine was like the mom, because she was always like babysitting his brother, and the mom was during that like conference call she had or something. Remember when she was in the office?
Mhm.
Yeah, and she was like, just deal with him, and she was really didn't want to deal with her brother. And so, and then the same with his dad always coming home
Late.
like late or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, why couldn't the dad have told the kid like, oh, I'll be home at 6, you know, because he didn't show up till 5:45. So why didn't he say something like later than he actually was going to be if he knew he was going to be late?
And I thought it was interesting that multiple times, you know, Catherine said late doesn't mean not coming. And she was trying to get David to understand that. But I, in my heart, was like, you know, if I have a child who I know is going to struggle with, if I'm 5 minutes late to something, I'm going to make every effort to not be there 5 minutes late, you know?
Yeah.
And so I thought that was a weird dynamic with the dad, that he didn't make more of an effort to be right there, right then.
Right.
Well, I thought it kind of was authentic because of those things, because I know me, like my little brother is 15 years younger than me. So a lot of the time I feel like and feel like sometimes that I'm his mom, because like when I'm home or whatever, sometimes I'm like, part of it is he's the youngest kid, but like, you know, I'm like, is somebody going to say something? Like, does somebody see what he's doing? Not because he's like this awful kid or it's so terrible, but it's just like, I think they're thinking like, oh, someone else's eyes are on him. So for 2 seconds, I cannot, you know, it's almost like I need a break for a second. So he's your responsibility. So I kind of thought that was authentic. I thought that the dad's character was authentic, but I thought it was frustrating for me because the same things that you were saying, Jessica, like I just felt like he was way too focused on like his job to where even like it was almost like maybe he knows that, but he didn't like care. That wasn't going to change like his behavior. So, and unfortunately, I feel like there's probably people like parents of children with autism that really is how they are, because they're like, oh, well, his mom's there, Catherine's there, or whatever. But I don't know. I would hope that wasn't the case, but I feel like it probably is for some people.
I think it was authentic in that it showed how people deal with hard things in different ways. Like he lost himself in his work in gardening, and the mom also in her job, and Catherine with like her social life.
Mm-hmm.
David's autism was hard, and it's not something they teach you as a married couple or as parents.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yes, it was authentic in that the parents showed their, I guess, natural fictional reactions to raising a kid with autism. I think how parents react and family members is very specific to the kid in and of itself, because the kid is a very specific person and every kid with autism is different. So I think every family was different too.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in a lot of cases, when you have a kid who like has autism or has a disability, sometimes that like brings a couple closer together, or it actually like tears them apart. Like my mom had a brother who had cerebral palsy, and he was in a wheelchair for his whole life. And so her parents actually divorced, which maybe I was biased reading about like the dad at first, but so that does happen sometimes, that like they don't come together, they do like closer. But this one, I kind of feel like it was an instance where they just kind of almost stayed the same.
Yeah.
And the dad, like, I felt when he showed up, he still wasn't really showing up. Like, he came to take David to the video store, but, like, didn't actually deal with any of the harder parts, maybe. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. And maybe that was, like, intentional by the author to sort of be like, this is messy sometimes, like, you know, with the business video call or whatever that the mother had to take when Christy was over, like, you know, her friend sort of like, hey, like, I want to hang out with my friend. I have things to do. I can't watch David every minute of every day. And she's sort of like, give me a minute, one more minute, like, give me, you know, and it's like, maybe that was intentional by the author. Maybe it wasn't, but interesting.
I like that perspective, Teresa, because I think it could have been a situation where Cynthia Lord was trying really hard to make this character relatable to students, like, you know, that because students' families aren't perfect. Yeah. And that's like an important distinction to make, because so often when you read books, you can be like, wow, I wish my life was like that. But this, it continues the staying relevant through the whole book. So I like that.
Yeah. My question about the book kind of stems off of this. So do you guys mind if we like hop to that one and then we can go back to just the ones about ASD?
Yeah.
My question was, do you think that it was hurtful or helpful that Catherine and David's dad was always late? Because I guess I kind of thought about it like you did at first, Jessica, where I was like, how could he be so careless? Like, he knows this is going to bother David. He knows it's going to make it harder on Catherine and their mom, because he's going to like freak out when he's not there on time. But, well, that was a poor choice of words, but he's going to maybe have a meltdown in that moment. But also, like, that's also the real world, that people are late sometimes. And so I just kind of wondered if you guys thought that was like, it's a good lesson for him to learn, like they're trying to teach that concept to him, that late doesn't mean not coming, but also is it almost like not neglect, but like just like lack of care that he was always late still?
I think it was hurtful to their relationship, like a father-son relationship. I see how it can be helpful in teaching him like real world problems, but if they're not teaching him how to deal with those issues, then what's the point? Because he's just having a meltdown or freaking out for no reason if they're not teaching him strategies to deal with that people are late sometimes and things change. I think if they had made an emphasis on, I don't know what strategy you would help him to do, but to deal with that, to, I don't know, not freak out, then it would have been more beneficial.
And going along with that strategy part, I mean, Catherine did, like, they would sit on the porch and they would, like, count the cars. But I think, like, to David, every car he saw that wasn't his dad's was, like, worse in a way. Like, that did hurt him, that he was waiting and each car that came wasn't his dad's. So I don't know how much that strategy actually, like, calmed him down aside from just counting and just kind of having that pattern to follow.
It's not fair to put that on Catherine either.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
She's not, like, she is in charge of her brother, but she's not in charge of how he deals with life's situations.
Yeah.
And she doesn't know. Like, it's not like no one ever taught her how to teach someone else that has autism how to deal with that strategy. So she's just trying to do the best that she can. So I agree.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, Carrie, like when her mom says we need to teach him how to use like real words instead of repeating the frog and toad story. I'm like, but if that's how he communicates, then that's, you know, going to be more beneficial than trying to get him to say something that he doesn't know how to communicate and then just it getting worse somehow. So I think that the mom's character was really frustrating to me at points because it's like, you're not really helping Catherine, like you're asking her to do all this stuff, but then the stuff that you're asking her to do, you're not letting her do in her own way that can actually help David maybe, so.
Mm-hmm. And I was sort of frustrated too, Jenna, because the mom says multiple times throughout the book, like, we need to encourage him to use his own words, X, Y, Z, all the time. She says that. Mm-hmm. But then she says that, and then she never follows up, like, doing that with him, like saying, instead of saying that, we should do this. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of one of those critiques or things that someone would tell you, but it's not actually helpful because they don't tell you how to go about it and do it differently or improve on it next time. So I could definitely understand, because I was frustrated as a reader. I'm wondering, okay, how should Catherine handle that situation? And there was never a solution provided. So I found that frustrating. So I'm sure Catherine, as a 12-year-old, would be frustrated with that.
Mm-hmm. I was kind of thinking that, you know how Catherine helps Jason write word cards or whatever? I was thinking maybe there could be a way that Catherine could help David by making like a sentence card or something to help him get his thoughts down on paper so that he can retrieve those for conversation. I don't know if that might happen later in the book. I don't know, but I was just thinking there has to be some connection between Jason and David. I don't know. That's just my thoughts.
Kind of going off of that, my question for you guys was the juxtaposition of how Catherine kind of treats David versus how she treats Jason. Because like I kind of got the impression, like I kind of picture it sometimes, like when David would come in with the cassette tape and it'd be broken, like I could like just see Catherine like sign me like, okay, here we go again. Like with Jason, she was always willing to do whatever to like, she would go above and beyond to make those word cards, like making the really beautiful drawings. And so I was kind of wondering what you guys thought of that juxtaposition kind of. And sorry, go ahead.
I kind of think that with the cassette tape, I think that was partially frustration with her dad because it was broken. And she kept telling him, buy him a new one. You need to buy him a new one. Buy him a new one. And it was still broken. And he kept coming. And, you know, there were other situations too with other things that he did. But I think that was part of that. I think that kind of lends to it that like part of Catherine's frustrations with David were like with her whole family. So, but it just kind of came about because of his actions, whereas Jason was like a separate conversation or interaction that she had when David wasn't around at all. So I think that kind of lended to it. I do think she was a little bit more forgiving of him, and I think part of that is that David was her brother. Jason was someone that she saw out and that she hurt once before, and she didn't want to do that again. So I think it was kind of like a mixture of those.
Yeah.
And I think that Catherine's relationship with David was a building block because obviously Jason is such a different character than David. But also I think her relationship with David was a building block to that relationship with Jason, because I don't think that without, those experiences that she had learning how to be more patient and accommodating, things like that with her brother, wouldn't have opened that door and maybe provided her the same opportunity to be that way. And as timely a fashion as she did, had she not had those experiences of being his older sister and all that.
Yeah. And I think not that she's like getting to her wit's end with David, but like it's a lot harder when you like live with someone. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like how we like live with roommates sometimes, and we're like, I'm around you like so often, so it's like, any like little thing is sort of like under a magnifying glass, instead of sort of being like, okay, I can have my own space. And then when I'm sort of in this clinic, like I feel this like honor and duty to like help this child, and like I have some experience, so I can actually like carry through with that and not get as so like worked up about like, why am I taking care of my younger brother all the time when my parents could be doing it? So like there's like this not extra baggage, but sort of.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All right, I have a question. Why do you think rules are so important to Catherine?
My question actually came from that too. I thought that the rules were, did this go away?
No, you're still there.
Good.
Okay. I thought that the rules were more for Catherine than they were for David, because every time David did something, she would write it down, and they were kind of abstract sometimes, like, sometimes people don't answer because they didn't hear you. Other times they didn't because they don't want to hear you. Mm-hmm. So this isn't answering your question, but it leads into mine. My question is, do you think that David and or Jason are used as a means to an end to promote Catherine's self-growth rather than accurately portraying autism? Or what do you think is the focus of the story, I guess? Disabilities or Catherine's moral improvement? I know that didn't answer your question, I'm sorry.
To kind of answer both, I guess, or I'm going to try to. With yours, Allie, I think for Catherine, I think she was really trying to teach him like nuances in life, if that's the word, maybe, that like people don't tell you, but like every time an experience would come about, she was trying to say like, hey, this is a rule for him, as like, you have to follow this, just so like this is how life works, kind of a thing. Like
teachable moments.
Yeah, like this is not like a hard and fast thing, but like when this happens to you, this is how you can handle it, kind of a thing. I do kind of think that some of them were for her, kind of going to yours, Emily, because it was things that she wanted him to understand, because when he didn't, she kind of paid the price for it, because he like would get upset, or, she was just usually the one like having to help him cope with it. I do think that the story, Emily, is mainly focused on Catherine. So I think like maybe like at the heart of it, it always comes back to her. I think it is meant to like communicate things about autism and like characteristics, but I do think like the overall story is about her and her growth. So does that answer it at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that overall, it's a story of acceptance. Mm-hmm. It's a story of figuring out how to accept her brother and her family as it is different from the people around her or the family that she thinks she ideally wants. But it's also a story of figuring out how to accept her own beliefs about people, because you see, I don't want to give anything away. Never mind. Sorry, I finished the book, but I don't want to give anything away. Okay,
yeah, I'm trying not to.
Someone else take over.
Kind of going on Allie's questions with the rules, I think the rules are a way for Catherine to kind of keep order in her part in the family, because so much of it does revolve around David. Like Tuesdays and Thursdays, they go to the clinic, and, the dad comes home at 5 and they go to the video store and stuff like that. So I think, because she also had her own rules, like collect things even if it's just for no reason and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of her way to just keep order in her own life. And then with Emily's question, I think I kind of agree with what Jessica said about being acceptance, and so it is kind of both about the disabilities, like her learning how to interact and like how to positively interact with people with disabilities. So like with her brother and with Jason, there wasn't really a whole lot for me with David, like kind of explicitly saying his characteristics. Like it was never really said what he went to the clinic for. Like Jason was there for speech therapy, but it was never said what David really went for. And you can kind of, tell that David has his little tics and quirks, but it's never really explicitly stated like, okay, here's what his characteristic is. And so I kind of both liked that and didn't really like that on the author's part, because it kind of put him on the back burner, whereas Catherine was in the spotlight for the story. I mean, she is the main character, but, at least for what our class is about, kind of trying to focus on David and his autism, it was kind of hard for me to find those little moments in the book. So,
was it occupational therapy? Is that what he went for, or did I just make that up?
No, he went for occupational therapy.
Okay.
Yeah. I kind of tried to look it up, like what the ties were between like people on the spectrum and occupational therapy, and I wish I hadn't closed it out, but it seemed like it said like
I think it's sensory stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like sensory stuff and like hand-eye, like stuff like that, if I'm remembering.
I think you work on, because isn't he sensitive to sound?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think it's working on that too.
Yeah. My question kind of goes off that for about ASD, if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
Or if someone else had something with the other one, I don't want to cut them off.
I think we're good.
I think you're good.
My other question was, I kind of like from that, like looking up about occupational therapy and stuff, I came across something that talked about how, like, for some people on the spectrum, therapists come up with this thing. It's called like a sensory diet or a sensory lifestyle. And it's like, because sometimes people that are on this spectrum struggle with those sensory things like Allie was talking about, like sounds, smells, colors even. It was about like almost like guiding their life to where, like, instead of having like colored paper, things are like black and white. Or like whenever there's like a lot of smells, they like put like a cologne or fragrance that they like on like a headband or a cloth, and then they can smell that if they like are overwhelmed by the sensory things around them. But we also, how like when we first started, we read that one thing that was talking about how people like on the spectrum and people that have other special needs sometimes have difficult transitions into like adult life. And I kind of like, it's like I struggle because I see how that's so good, and how like if that helps people cope right then and there, that's what matters. And if that makes life easier for them. But then I kind of wondered, like, okay, if you're on a job and you work at like, I don't know, like Hickory Dickory Dock or somewhere like that with a lot of bright colors, or like, I mean, just anything at a school even, is that realistic for your whoever to only print your things in black and white, and or to cut out all these other sensations, when sometimes you're going to be in a situation where you can't cut those out? Like, do you think that's really like helpful for that transition? Or do you think it's like an age thing where maybe at one point that might be appropriate and another time it won't?
I did my student teaching abroad, and in the school they had a sensory room where it was only kids with autism would go there, and they had like quiet music and like this light up water tube and blankets and all of that. And they went to that room to have low input of sensory so that they could come down from whatever set them off, whether it was noises or bright lights or stuff. They were kids that were 4 to like 12.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the purpose of those sensory rooms are to enable them to gain control, like a quiet chair when a kid gets out of control and just needs to sit down and get himself back together. This sounds terrible. I think someone who has such severe sensory needs that if they freak out if like a certain texture touches them or a certain color, I don't think they would be placed in a job that has such an unpredictable environment. They can. I'm not saying that's not possible. And the other thought I had was that as they grow older, they can kind of learn different, more subtle ways to deal with their sensory input. Like, have y'all ever seen the bristle brushes that they use to like put on their arms, or weighted? You can buy weighted clothes or stuff like that. Stuff that isn't as obvious as going to a sensory room. So I think it definitely helps kids in the moment, and I think it's definitely needed. I think some kids will grow out of that, and then some unpredictable jobs aren't really an option for them.
I think that you're right, Emily, because my mom is a kindergarten teacher, and she had a child in her room several years ago who had autism, and his security blanket was one of those big down puffy jackets, and he wore it all the time, always, and it was something he needed. He needed it to feel confident, and that was, he's in kindergarten, so it was a big transition year because he'd never been around 20 some other kids his age, and there's a lot going on in a classroom. But as he progressed through, he's in like 6th grade now, and as he went through school, he needed less and less of the comfort things that he needed when he was in my mom's room. So they kind of found some things that made him feel comfortable, and then gradually they, he didn't need those supports anymore. So I definitely think, not necessarily for everyone, but for a lot of students, it could be a case where they use those things for a little while, they get those accommodations for a little while, like you were talking about, Carrie, and then maybe they kind of grow out of that, or get to a point where they don't need those things. So
that's like the headphone things. Have you ever seen kids wearing the headphones when they're sensitive to sound? Well, I feel like you don't see many older people wearing the headphones with phones. I think it's a thing that you grow out of also. I mean, not all people, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they might, I think OT helps with that too. Like they help with, I don't know how to say it, like getting kids ready, like helping with the sensory problems. That's what I'm saying.
So, I mean, maybe, yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying. I just was wondering, I guess, like long term, like what that looks like, because I was thinking about, those articles that talked about those problems with transitioning. And I was just wondering if that, like, I don't know, but I was like, but it's really needed too. So that's why I wanted to pose it, because I was just like, I can see both sides of that kind of, but thanks, y'all.
I do think, I'm just going to go off of it for 1 second. I do think like you can grow out, if that's even the right term, grow out of autism, because one of my close friends, like her brother, his characteristics were more severe when he was younger, but now interacting with him, like you wouldn't even know that he was on the spectrum. And I think the reason that sometimes it comes out so severely in kids is because that's also the age that all kids in general are trying to figure out how to communicate and how to, tell people what they like, what they don't like, what they need, all those kinds of things. So when you've got a kid who like can't explain that like his stomach hurting is a stomach ache, and he just thinks like it's a pressure on him, it just seems more severe. But as they like kind of grow up and learn how to better communicate, I do think that some of that does go away, and they don't need as much of the kind of hand holding and all of that sort of stuff. I do think that if you can grow out of autism, and I don't really think that's the right term to use, but I think it can get less severe as you grow up and kind of work that into the workplace environment. Also, I think along with that, if you just have not only a company, but like a society that's kind of like willing to accept and help with that, that's also going to go a long way. And I feel like we're not necessarily in that society, but I feel like if you've got a workplace that's willing to help, like work with you on the stuff that you need, that's also a big thing.
Yeah. And I think about too, now that I'm a little bit older, I know things that I prefer that help me be more successful at my job, and, coping things that I've learned. And those are things that, like Jenna said, with the right employers, that's something that they're more than willing to help with so that I'm successful in my position.
And I would say you can't really grow out of autism. You just learn more and more strategies to deal with the symptoms of autism.
Yeah.
Because it's always going to be there, but they seem to go away because they learned how to quietly calm themselves when they're overwhelmed or something like that.
Like, I don't want to say like one day they're going to magically wake up and be cured, but like I think like it does get better over time, like if you really work with the right people with it.
Right, and I'm taking another online ASD online class during this session, and even just last night we were talking about like sort of different supports that you can use with kids. So you could do like visual supports and like positive reinforcement, and sort of like, can they construct social stories? Like, do they work well with others? Do they get easily frustrated? What are those situations where they get easily frustrated? So I think a lot of it does sort of lie on like parents and teachers to sort of like have that like awareness and understanding. It's just like how when we teach reading, right? And it's like, we need to know how to administer the IRI, and like, you know, what are we looking for? What are we testing? What do they struggle with? And just sort of like being aware of that, you know, because like even just in the reading clinic, like I had a 3rd grade girl who couldn't read a kindergarten book, you know, and it was just sort of these years of collecting, not really catering to what she needed. And I think working with kids with ASD is sort of the same way, you know, and then we were sort of like looking back on it and we're like, oh my gosh, all the things we could have done or tested, like the things we could have trained for, and we didn't, you know. So it's interesting to see like how kids can evolve and develop in it, or how they can actually fall behind this gap. So just being aware of that and knowing what practices to carry out, I feel like is a huge indicator of whether that kid is going to thrive, you know, with ASD, without ASD, whatever type of child it is.
So kind of going back, my question with ASD, kind of also going off partly the society that we live in, how do you guys think that more visible disabilities, like somebody like Jason who's in a wheelchair, he can't talk, like it's very obvious, like he has something with him, whereas, you know, if you look at David, like you might think that he's just like every other boy until something happens, like a loud noise startles him. So what do you guys think kind of, and it's also getting that really touchy mental health subject issue that always starts debates, but what do you guys think our society kind of views what you can see versus like what you have to really try to understand? So like you see somebody in a wheelchair versus like, you know, you kind of have to get to know somebody to know, okay, they don't like loud noises, they don't like, you know, this type of fabric on them, that kind of thing.
I think if like someone has a more physical disability, I think our society and just people tend to like jump to like feeling sorry for them, you know, whereas like someone that like, if, you know, just like a certain texture like makes them upset, if I don't understand why, like especially like maybe like I might just think like, man, they really need to get their kid in line, they're over there yelling or something, you know, like we're not gonna think, unless without like this training and without experience and exposure, which a lot of people don't have, we might not think, oh, that person might be on the spectrum. We might just think that kid needs a spanking or like something like that, you know? Whereas like if someone has a physical, outwardly, you know, something that someone can see right off the bat, they're gonna be like, oh, I feel so sorry for you. Not that either one is better than the other. They're both flawed and they're both need to be redirected. But I think that's the difference a lot of times, is like sympathy versus criticism.
And also fear. I think a lot of people are afraid, or kids or adults are afraid of people with physical disabilities who maybe can't talk well, or if you encounter someone with autism and they're doing weird things with their hands or screaming or something, I think there's just a lot of fear involved with that, because you fear what you don't understand and they don't know what's going on. Like, why is this kid screaming who's 15? Like, I think it doesn't make sense a lot of the time. So I think the initial reaction is fear or uncertainty, unless, like you said, they have experience in that and be like, okay, something deeper is going on with them.
I was fortunate enough during my student teaching to work with my cooperating teacher is wheelchair bound permanently. And I can say from my own experiences, we also had like a little boy in my class who had autism. And I think personally, I would phrase it as people in general as a population are more willing to accommodate for people who have physical disabilities. Like, people will run ahead to go open the door for my teacher and, oh, let me move that chair, and, things like that. But I think we as a whole society are far less willing to make accommodations, whatever that means, for people who have disabilities that we can't see as readily. Mm-hmm. And that's just from my own experience, but I can see people got frustrated much more easily and much more quickly with that little boy in my class than they did with Miss Huffman. And so that was really eye-opening for me to see that, the things that she struggles with and the things that he struggles with, like, we all have struggles in our life. And so that's something that I found really interesting to watch and view and kind of compare those things that we call disabilities regardless. So.
Did any of y'all ever read Tori Hayden's books? Mm-mm. Is anyone else a special education major?
No.
Never mind. You should read her books. She talks about all kinds of disabilities, and she touches on that, how many of her kids look perfect on the outside, but they have such destructive behaviors that the administration isn't really as sympathetic to them and willing to work with them versus people that you can see. My question isn't related to that at all. In the second article, it was talking about how most books with autism are very positive, which is good, but they touched on the fact that there's something limiting about them, how they don't show the whole spectrum of human emotion, like sadness and anger and all of that. Mm-hmm. So my question off of that, do you think there should be more negative media forms of autism where the person with autism can also play like the villain and the hero? And if so, as an educator, would you allow that into your classroom? These are 3 questions. And how do you think the parents would respond to those materials that show people with autism not being good or positive?
I feel like that's walking a really fine line, at least for me. Like, if I were to see something like that, and I think we're getting better about it just because of the times that we're in, but maybe if it was sometime back, like 60s, 70s, when this wasn't as well accepted, and I don't really like to say accepted, but kind of well regarded, I feel like if someone made something where the villain or the bad person in a show or book had autism, I would feel like it was almost like a negative social commentary, like, oh, they've got this disability, so they're bad, or like, they've got autism, so they're bad, kind of thing. So I think even still, they're trying to find that line of what's acceptable and what's going to be okay to say and portray. And I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I think that that's not really fair to people with autism to have these characters and they're like held up in such a high light, because they're also people. Like, they have bad days, they might do bad things. Mm-hmm. But at least I feel, for me, if I were to see something like that, and it might have to just be done in a well done way with, like, consultants and all that stuff, but I feel like if I were to see somebody as the villain and they had autism, I would feel like it was kind of like making fun of them, or just making like a really bold statement against the community as a whole. Mm-hmm. So as a teacher, I would want to have like really well vetted sources for it and make sure, like, okay, this isn't what it's saying. Like, it's just saying they are also people, like good, bad, all of that. Like, we're all kind of that, not really holding them up on a pedestal as much. I do think that both parents of the kids with autism and just parents in general might also think that that's just kind of maybe in poor taste almost. But I see where your question is coming from about having the whole range of emotions with it, and like the good people and the bad people. Like, having an autistic person playing a villain, I think, would be a good next step if it's done correctly.
I think it's important to provide authentic text in the classroom. That would be how I would kind of respond to your question. And I think that as I anticipate my own classroom in a year, I think a lot about the way that, sometimes it's important for us to share our passions and what, you know, we feel is important with our kids. But sometimes I think that means that you need to open the door to communication with parents and just being honest about, this is something that I would really like to share with your child and with this class, because I think, you know, this is an important part of being a world citizen. And so that would kind of be how I approach it, is saying, just being upfront and saying, I want to present this material. I invite you to look at it, to consider it, to come to me with questions and concerns and ideas. And, you know, this is kind of, I would do it as like an open discussion. But like I said, I just think it's important, authentic text. That would be the word that I would use. And to make sure that I'm doing research and educating myself, that I have the most authentic text for all types of people in my classroom.
I kind of going off of that, Jessica, my initial response to your question was like what Jenna's was, that I was just like, oh, I don't know, like I would be nervous to do that, you know. But I think as Jessica was talking, my mind was kind of going to, if I was going to show that, I would want it to be like maybe authentic in the way of, I present this film project, and if it came about that the person in my class that had autism wanted to play the villain, or they wanted to play the hero, or they wanted to play the whoever, and it came about as that way, then I think I would. But I think just myself, I think I would step carefully with something like that, because I think it could go really wrong really quickly, or it could go really well. But I think like that would depend on the group of parents you had. I think that would depend on the class, your administration, a lot of things. But I think in an effort to be authentic with that, I would let it be done naturally, maybe. I don't know. And almost be like they create it and how they think that it would be portrayed, versus like, I don't know. I feel like I think about, I don't watch The Big Bang Theory like regularly, but just like I've seen it here and there in the clips that we watch and stuff, and it bothers me that, like, even though it said they've never come out and said that Sheldon is on the spectrum, I feel like he's smart and he's so intelligent, and he's supposed to be portraying this person with autism, but it's like in a laughable way. And I think I would like it's supposed, they like make fun of him kind of, and they press the laugh button every time he says something. I would be fearful that it would be like, oh, this is the villain, but like it's funny, you know what I mean? And it's like people don't take them seriously, which wouldn't really, I don't think that would sit well with me. But
yeah, I don't know.
That's a good question though. It's
That's
hard.
Yeah. It's hard because I mean, it's even just like how you have such a wide array of parents and teachers, and you change classrooms every year, and it's like sort of depending on what you're sitting with, you know. You could even have like, you know, the most thought out like lesson plans sometimes that you're like, there are no holes that can be poked in this, like from every which way. This is going to turn out so well. And then like parents are like, yeah, I didn't really think that was like something you should have done. And you're like, ah. So I think I really do think as long as, and sometimes we're going to make those mistakes. And I really do think that that's sometimes a part of it. Obviously when we're thinking about these things, we need to really try to, you know, think these out, bounce it off of other colleagues and say, what do you think? But I mean, I do think that sometimes that is just a learning curve. And I do think as long as you are like, I think the first thing we said was upfront with that, like, this is my goal. This is what I'm aiming to do. Like, this is who I am. That I think that hopefully parents are usually pretty understanding. And if they're not, I mean, that's a case by case deal. I mean, you can't prepare for everything, you know. And it's like how we were talking about in the beginning, where we were like, some people are going to relate to it and think it's wonderful and be like, this is such a good representation of me. And then, you know, you have other like girls in the article who are like, no, I feel totally like undervoiced and I don't feel like I'm being represented well. And so I guess just in that effort, like that's just sort of it's a constant sort of, you know, fix this, fix that. Like it's never really over, I think, like with teaching. And that can be tricky and heartbreaking sometimes, you know. But I think as long as we're just trying to stay in front of that curve and sort of like be upfront about it, that I think we'll be okay. So.
And I think the key is having conversations like this, like with colleagues and peers, like, because I think, Emily, that's a really powerful question. And I'm glad that you asked that, because it's challenging and there's not like a super black and white answer. So I think the key for all of us is to constantly have conversations and challenge our own practices and challenge our colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think also in general, like changing the conversation and just the general view of portrayals of anything. Like you take any like kind of subclass almost, like, you know, women in media, and then like people of color in media and all of that. If you go back far enough, at one point, if it wasn't a white man, it was probably negative character. And so kind of just changing how it was into how it should be, and kind of moving away. And I kind of touched on this in last week's thing because I have a really big issue with this trope, but kind of moving away from the savant trope of somebody on the spectrum being like, oh, they're super genius and they can help us, you know, solve this like unsolvable crime or something. And then on the other end of that, and this hasn't been as much in recent years, thank goodness, but on the other end of the spectrum, having somebody who like can't really take care of themselves and are kind of the punchline, and, you know, the R word is being thrown around and everything. So kind of just changing the whole representation into something more positive, and that goes for anything, like people on the spectrum, women, people of color, all of that. So I think that just changing the conversation and changing the way these things are portrayed in general will help as well, and kind of showing, you know, we're also people, so we have that range, so it's okay if we're the villain sometimes, just like not as the punchline and not as an every time occurrence of people with ASD are, you know, the villains or something, like they're bad, like something's wrong with them, that kind of thing.
I think that as long as you include all types of books, speaking of like race, books about race of different, into your classroom library, as well as people from all levels of the spectrum, the autism spectrum, I think that would help a lot, because then you have different types of books included in there that can reach everyone, as well as open the eyes of children and be like, oh, look, hey, there's all different types of people out here. You can't be, I don't know, discriminate against someone else just because of who they are.
And that exposure too, that it's not just, this is the one type of person with autism, you know, it's like, look at all this. I think that's really big, Allie. And Emily, you go, because you go.
I have two thoughts. The first thought is, I think people today are very, very sensitive to what they say because they don't want to offend anybody, which is good. But I think in truly treating people with disabilities equally, that you have to treat them just as you would anyone else. So in children's literature, there's positive kids and there's negative kids. And I think that sometimes we only allow positive literature towards certain disabilities like autism to give to our kids because we don't want to let them down. We don't want them to be sad or angry or any of that. And that's certainly good, but it's not realistic. Another point that the article made was how by reading, they called it like dark fiction, by reading this dark fiction, that kids had an outlet, that when they felt angry or misunderstood, they could go and read these books and say someone else feels this way instead of just having another happy ending. So I think that is how I would approach parents in that your kid is a kid and they have all kinds of feelings, and that these books are here to help them, not to put them down, as I know we should be very careful of, because in the past we've had a horrible trail, what's the phrase? Trail record?
Track record.
Track record.
Track record.
With that. So I think it's something that we're kind of moving towards. We have introduced autism into our society as a more prevalent thing, and it's very positive. And now it's kind of looking at, all right, we have all these positive characters. Now, how can we show more depth and more emotion to these people that at the end of the day are people, just like everyone else?
I think one of the articles mentioned, oh, here it is, The Chocolate War, which was a book, and it's kind of like that dark fiction. And I think the author of the article even went on to say, like, okay, well, what if the bully was on the spectrum, or what if the guy who was being bullied was on the spectrum. So I'm like, okay, take that idea, like what if the bully had autism, and go with that. Like that's not, a super positive character, because bullies never are, but like what would come of that if the bully did have autism? So I think yeah, it can be done, just tread lightly, I think.
This is kind of like, it relates, but with what Emily and Jenna are saying, like my little brother he just finished kindergarten, and I'm not going to say a person was a bully, but a little boy that had special needs. I'm not sure what exactly his what it was exactly, but the little boy pushed my little brother's head into a concrete wall, like more than one time, and my mom was really upset about it. And I think it was kind of like, at first it was like, I understand, but then she kind of got to the point where it was like, this needs to stop, because like he's gonna hurt my son, so it's kind of like, I feel like that's kind of like what you guys are saying, like in like a real life, I guess, example, that like sometimes, not that he's a bad guy, because but sometimes like people, like you're saying, Emily, people that have special needs are real people too, and they mess up too, and they might not always be the one that's getting picked on. Like, does that make sense? So
Yeah.
I think those are really good points, that that's good to expose children to literature and things like that, so that it's not just every person with autism is always gonna act like this, and they're always gonna get picked on and all that, because it's not real life.
Yeah.
I think that's really, and that's something I've never really thought about before. Like, I would think I was kind of like the person you were describing, Emily, that's always like, no, everything's great. We got to be nice and happy and, be so careful. But I think I'm seeing how that can be like not authentic with what we need to be. So.
And like, even going off of that, like how I remember how in Beth Fry's class, we talked about the importance of like saying like someone is displaying bullying behavior. So if we were to be, looking through a text or come across a situation in our classroom, like I think it really does come down to sort of like doing what we're doing here, right? And saying like, well, do you think like that person like had a reason that they felt like that? But do you still think that they should have done something different? And just sort of like, I think it all really does go back to those like questions that you are asking students. And like, sometimes like we really don't get to like, oh, that's the answer. Okay, it's A. All right, like move on. And I think like those are like all the best classes I've had, where like we've had those open discussions, and that's where we have learned so much, where students are like, well, hey, like I've been pissed off before. Like I had a really bad day and I said something, but I took it back and I said I was sorry. And it's like, that's a teachable moment, right? And it's like knowing that like emotions are okay to have, but what are healthy ways to address them, or what are things we can deal with that? So again, like going back to sort of like dealing with those situations or texts that we read, make sure that we're scaffolding with the right questions to have those discussions in our room. And I really do feel like you can talk about a lot with kids, and I mean, within reason, but they're there to learn, they're there to talk, and so are you. So it's like, I feel like that's where I get like the most value out of it, is like knowing that like kids can talk about these things, and we can sort of work towards an answer, but maybe we don't always get to it. Maybe we just talk and we ask a lot of questions, but at least we got more forward than we were the day before, or whatever it is.
So my second question kind of goes off of this. So do y'all want me to go ahead? Do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
On, I don't remember what chapter this is in, but it's like page 86. So kind of right at the end of where we were theoretically going to finish talking today. It's when Catherine dumps the puzzle out to do with David, and she talks about the way that he approaches puzzles really differently than the average quote unquote person would. And she says how he does it left to right, from top to bottom, always. And he gets really upset if you put any of the pieces not in that order. And I kind of took that as a metaphor for, a good explanation, even to how sometimes like these people with disabilities just approach things differently, and that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with it, but that's just, it puts a good image on different. And so I was wondering, I started to think about how, potentially I or we could use that kind of image to open up a discussion about autism in our classrooms. And I was wondering if you guys had any input on approaches that you might use in talking about the ways that not necessarily just autism, but students that are different in your classrooms. How do you go about having discussions and opening the floor and that kind of thing?
I've kind of had this internal conversation with myself for like a few semesters now about more in the topics of differentiation come up and how you would approach something like a choice chart, like the little kind of bingo things where you do like a select number, or, one student only has to do like the odd number questions, stuff like that. Like, how do you differentiate for those who need it without calling attention to maybe the why they need it? And so again, starting that conversation with your kids, and I think with students like very, very early in the school year, like hit the ground running with it, and just kind of, giving everyone the tools that they need, and like, what they need might be different than what you need to do their best, because their best is different than your best, and just all of that, and kind of approaching it with, some people just need to do things differently to get to where they need to be. If like, for example, one student is reading, kindergarten books, but the rest of his classmates are in the 4th grade, like, so that it's more that's what he needs to do to get where he needs to be, and not necessarily like, oh, he's reading, kindergarten books, we can make fun of him now. Like, kind of keeping those conversations open and letting the kids know that you as the teacher are doing everything you can for each one of the students, like them included, whoever might be, asking these questions or potentially teasing or something, and kind of saying you guys are all getting what you need, and this just happens to be what they need for this right now. So I think doing that very early on, I think, is also key. Yeah.
That kind of brings me to that picture. Have you guys seen the equality versus
equity?
Of the boxes. I don't know. That's what I think, that you have to. That not everyone needs the same supports as other people.
That was exactly what I was gonna say, Allie. Like from Dr. Reader's class, whenever that's exactly. I mean, just showing them that, like, even if it was like, I'm not saying take your glasses off and put them on, but something to show them like this helps them, that you don't need this. This almost hurts you, or whether it's the stools or the whatever it is, so that it's like, we all have this same goal, but we're not going to get to it the same way, and that's okay. So it's like from the very beginning, establishing that, like you're saying, Jenna, it's different. It's not all, it doesn't mean it's not fair, but we're all just trying to get to this end goal.
Like, you're not necessarily making it like an easier assignment on somebody. I mean, in some cases you might be, but like, those modifications are there to help, not necessarily make one thing harder on someone else. It's not a question of fairness. It's a question of like, can we all get there by the end of the year, which is the goal.
Yeah, I think about that metaphor a lot, Jenna, like that, I want my class and the students in there to be, we're a team and we're all trying to get to this finish line. And, what matters is that we're each doing what we need to do individually to get there. Mm-hmm. And like you said, that's going to be different, and fair isn't always equal. I'm glad that you brought that up, Allie, and that you elaborated on that, Carrie, because I was thinking the same thing.
I think it's important how you go about it. Instead of if you have a kid with autism in your class just talking about autism, I would fit autism into the discussion of diversity, because it is a part of diversity, and that's how all people with disabilities and different cultures and religions and races are. So I would just make sure it's not, today we're going to talk about autism, we're going to make it like Autism Week or something, which is a good start, but I would just kind of fit it into the discussion so you're not singling out that kid or his
And I think, like, going forward, when we do think about how we're going to approach these things in our classrooms, I really do think, like, when we talk about what that first beginning step is, because sometimes we're like, which one is it? Should we do what Jenna says? Should we start with how Emily says? Should we do it equitably? Should it be equally? Like, I do think that, like, it does sort of start with, like, knowing your students and getting to know them and, like, building those relationships in the beginning of the year so that, like, like, what is best for them. And even so, like, that their peers knows what's best for them, like, I really think that building those student relationships, like, from the get-go is, like, probably one of the best steps, if not the best one, that you can take as a teacher to ensure that you're carrying it out, at least maybe not always in a perfect way, but I guess like y'all said, like in an equitable way that works for them to get them to that point. So I had a question about the book. I already asked my ASD question, but I was sort of thinking about how there were points in the book where Catherine would do or say something, and sometimes I would be like, I really admire her that she's 12 years old and this is the approach that she's taking. And then there were other times in the book where I was like, dude, what are you doing? Why are you being so impatient? Like, can you please grow up? And then I'm like, wait, she's only 12. And it was like sort of like this back and forth, like, yay, like, you know, like just this sort of. So my first question was, it's sort of twofold, but it's like, what traits or circumstances in the book where you were like, I admire that? And then what were other instances where you were kind of like, I don't really like that you did that, but you can almost relate to it because you're like, dang, like if I was trying to be friends with Christy and like, you know, she had all these pretty nail polishes and everything, like I would be upset that I, you know, didn't have that and that my mom was like, please watch out for my brother. So like basically what instances from the book were you like, I admire that in Catherine, and other parts where you either didn't or you like strangely related to it, even if you don't want to admit to it?
The point where I was really impressed, I mean, there were several points, like you said, Teresa, but you know, you guys remember, oh gosh, now I'm scared it's going to go too far.
That's what I was just looking.
Well, hold on. Maybe time out. Let me look and see what I was about to talk about.
The part that we finished at was the last thing she did in the clinic. She brought Nutmeg, her guinea pig, to see Jason. Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of looking to see what comes past that.
What page? Was it 100? Was that what we said?
103. That's where we ended for this time, yeah.
I will say, just as an overview, I really admire Catherine's ability. I know that this was written by an adult, but her ability to sometimes pinpoint her feelings about things and her exactly why, what is she frustrated about and things like that. Because I don't feel that I could do that probably when I was 12 years old. Like, I do not have a belief in myself that I was
something that you just learn as you grow up, and I think I'm still getting there.
Yeah. She articulates very, and like I said, I realize an adult wrote this, but as a character, she articulates herself very well. So I admire that. And I'm not sure if that's supposed to be something that's reflective of her being an older sibling, if that's a personal quality that she has. I don't know, but I really admire that a lot.
There was this one part that I was kind of mad at. It was when Christy came over and she was talking to Catherine, and she was like, that must be hard. Even regular little brothers are a pain. And then it says regular snarls on my stomach. And so I kind of thought like that was like Catherine should have stood up for her brother and said like, well, what is regular? Like, what is normal? I don't know. Just, she could have, that just bothered me that she didn't stick up for her brother and really say like, well, everyone's different. There's not one interpretation of normal or regular for that sake. So.
Yeah, it bothered me when she tried to hide him a lot from either her friends or his behaviors. I can understand why she did it, but I was just like, he's your brother. I know he's annoying, but I just don't think she had reached that maturity level yet. But what really impressed me was her interactions with Jason, how she was kind of like, he's in a wheelchair, kind of scared at first, but then she just took so naturally to him and ended up, well.
Yeah, it's so hard.
But I really like how she interacted with him like he was normal.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I can say any of the things I was going to say until next time. Maybe if someone else wants to ask the question again. But one thing that I was really impressed with was when she is making the word cards for Jason, some of the words that she gave him, I think I would have been afraid to give them to him because I would be like, what's his mom gonna say, you know, like, or, you know, I just different things. But then I thought about it, like, kind of like with what you were saying earlier, Emily, about like treating even people that have exceptionalities as people, because that's what they are. Because if I can look at my mom and say whatever, and so can he, you know. But like, I think like I would have been like, oh, I can't give him that word, like, you know. But like, I thought it was really good that she just like treated him just like anyone else. I mean, she still had her moments, but she, with making those cards, I was really impressed with that part.
Mm-hmm.
And I was disappointed by the same thing, or not disappointed, but the same things with her hiding him in different parts. I'll just say that generally and not giving anything else.
I think with me also, her like kind of hiding and not talking about him frustrated me more than it should, because talking about having these conversations, if you're not open to like having those conversations, then people who don't know aren't going to learn. And I think what bothered me the most was that it was, you know, Christy and Ryan, like they're 12, like they're still kids, so they can still, you know, be open and kind of have those conversations. But as they grow older and they just see, oh, well, you know, David's different, but they don't really understand the why behind it, that's where you kind of get into all these misconceptions and kind of like the mistreatments and everything, and not really understanding. And at that point, kind of, I think when you're older, sometimes not wanting to understand. So I was just frustrated that she wouldn't open those conversations with somebody that she wanted to be her best friend. Like, she's like, Christy and I are going to be best friends. I'm like, well, if you're hiding this part of your life, if you're hiding your brother, then you can't really be.
Yeah.
So that was very frustrating to me. Something that impressed me, she is 12. So, I mean, I think that if I had this experience, I think when I was 12, I would have had way more kind of like meltdown preteen episodes than she did, kind of being like, you know, each time David would come to me with something, I would just be like, ah. And so I think like, you know, she handled a lot of it pretty well. And so like the outbursts that she did have, I think as a 12-year-old, like she kind of earns almost. So
Yeah.
that was kind of impressive that like she can compose herself that well for a 12-year-old girl in that situation where she's kind of on the back burner of the family.
Yeah. And I think like that's so strange, like in life, how that works sometimes, where we're like, we sort of like want everything to go in like this certain structure and order, and we look at what other people have or whatever, compare our lives to other people. And then it was like, even sometimes like these struggles are like the best things that like, you're like, oh, well, it taught me like this skill and this skill and this skill and this skill. Otherwise, if I wouldn't have had, like, would I have developed that? Like, would I would have to do it a different way? Like, maybe it's, you know, so I think just sort of that. But I mean, again, she's still 12, you know, like she's just, I just don't think she's there yet. But I think that in the ways that she is there, I'm like, okay, like, you know, I would totally advocate for her as a character. But yeah, there's just a few instances where you almost want to like pass on older wisdom, you know. It's like when you ask your mom, like, what should I be afraid of, like, you know, for 25, and she tells you, like, she's like, well, just don't worry about where you are in the road, just keep going, you know. Like, you wish you could just like pass it down to her, but you know, we can't do that. But
Yeah.
So
Well, I have a question. This one is, it says, what strategy could possibly help David or another child of ASD follow rules? So when David, multiple times he went into his sister's room, and one of the rules was don't put toys in the fish tank. And he kept constantly going back in there and putting toys in the fish tank. Mm-hmm. So like how are some ways that like we could help children in our class maybe follow those like specific rules, or how could we help, I don't know, help them follow the rules if they're going to keep repeatedly doing the same thing over and over again?
I think David was using that to get his sister's attention and to have like an interaction with her, because usually it kind of felt like she was always shut up in her room or angrily babysitting him. So I think he did that for attention. I think my first step would just be to ignore it, because in reality it's not that big of a deal. There's a toy in the fish tank. And see if he stopped it. If not, I would regroup and go from there. But I don't know why she got so angry over that.
Yeah.
It's not hurting anything.
I do kind of see, though, like, it's really and truly not that big of a deal, but, like, her having to like just continuously like deal with it and be the one to take it out, because and like you, it's really not that big of a deal, but I kind of feel like, I don't know, and maybe I'm just thinking like from a big sister perspective or something, where like with my little brother, I think like sometimes he needs to learn this now, because later down the road this is going to be a bigger problem, you know. And my mom's like, it's really not that big of a deal, but like, so maybe that's just me relating to the sister, you know, in her. But I kind of feel like that's kind of a harder question too, because I think like in a classroom perspective, you know, your mind goes to like either like some kind of reinforcement, you know, and of course you want to try the positive, but I think too, in an attempt to treat all people like people, there would need to eventually come a negative not reinforcement, a negative reaction. I don't know the word, but just because like if it wasn't dropping a toy in the fish tank, say it was hitting the person in the back of the head with a pencil, or like getting up and like leaving the classroom, or, you know, like something like that. I'm just thinking of other things that may be a bit of a bigger deal. I think that would like, and I'm not saying like yelling at them and taking them to the principal's office, but some kind of something would need to, I feel like, happen. And I think that part of the reason that it continued to is because Catherine was the only one dealing with it, and she just took it out because she was just like, she would remind him of the rule and she would take it out. And I mean, she's 12. What else is she going to do, you know?
Right. And sometimes it's not even just like the action, it's like the principle behind it. I think sometimes like in trying to like teach that to kids, it's like, it wasn't, I mean, I feel like not only has she like racked up a little bit of impatience towards David by this point in the book, but she also like generally she's just sort of like, well, by doing that though, like you're not just putting a toy in the fish tank, like you're disrespecting like my boundaries and my things, and like sort of like it's hard for kids to like get their brain around that sometimes, and it's hard for us as adults to be like, how can I get them to understand this, you know? So I think that's tricky, and I guess, you know, we and they both alike, we learn that by practice, you know, where it's like, hey, like you not only like just like took something from me, but it hurts my feelings that you would even just like take something that isn't yours, right? So I guess just like, again, like I really do think it goes back to having those conversations, you know, and then just sort of like when they don't do the right thing, like you have to tell them right then and there, and you have to be consistent with what you're saying. Be fair, but like be consistent. You know, don't, you know, you have to explain those things to them. So, but yeah, that's a tricky line too. There's so many tricky lines.
I definitely agree with you, Teresa, though, that those like having that conversation is like going to be super beneficial.
Yeah.
Because I think when kids have a why, it makes it easier to know, okay, I'm not going to do that because.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even if you have to reiterate the why a whole lot.
Yeah.
Because like when I was student teaching, the student in my class had a behavior chart that for every class he got a rank, a number of, you know, how well did you participate, how well did you interact with others, listen, etc. And like we would give him a number, and then we would tell him why. You know, you got a 3 today because you raised your hand before you answered a question and you didn't interrupt, or, you know, and giving them a why helps them to understand these are the behaviors that I want to repeat, and these are the things that, well, I don't want to get a 1, so I'm not going to do this anymore. So, and that was every day, every class. So that repetition really helped a lot.
Yeah. And I, you know, again, like I think that kids, like, I mean, because maybe they don't sort of feel the depth and the breadth of like what they're doing at that age, and you know, maybe even the action they did wasn't that big of a deal, but you know, it does sort of go back to this idea of like when you do become an adult, like how high those stakes actually do get. You know, it's like when we all took block 2 and we were just like, there is no possible, there's like, I was like, there's no way that I can do anything besides eat dinner, like after, and then just like go back and do work, you know what I mean? There's like no, like I felt like I had no time to do everything, but it's like they were like preparing us in that way to sort of say like, you think you're going to have more time like when you have your own classroom and when you have your own family, you know? So it's like, sort of at least getting those those training wheels going for kids to sort of be like, yeah, like it's, you know, it's not always going to be this way forever. Like, you know, there's going to be times when you're going to have to accept like high levels of responsibility. And like, if you don't sort of start that early, like you're sort of, you know, short circuiting them a little bit, and that's not fair either. Right. So, you know, obviously within reason, age appropriate, but you know, they need to know that. That's important. So.
And instead of just thinking about it as positive and negative behaviors, I would encourage people to change the behaviors by redirection. Like, all the kids are doing stuff for a reason. You might never know that reason, but just trying, most of the time it's just either self-soothing or trying to get someone's attention, but they don't know how to do it in an appropriate way. So teaching them that, like, instead of hitting someone on the back of the head, let's raise your hand or come get the teacher or something like that.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, Emily, like figuring out the why of maybe the behaviors that they're doing. Like maybe, you know, okay, sure, maybe David putting the toys in the fish tank is a way to get Catherine's attention, but he could just as easily just walk into her room. Like, you know, why the toys in the fish tank, and maybe even going beyond that, like why each specific toy. Like there might not be any deeper meaning in the book, but like just kind of figuring out like why a kid might be doing the things that they're doing. It might just take a little time to figure out, but I think taking that time is worth it to figure out, okay, this is what you're trying to say, like, and then redirecting, like Emily said, and trying to figure out a more beneficial way of saying it. So.
Thanks for answering my question. Those are my questions. I don't have any more.
Did everyone ask them?
I'm finished.
I got both of mine, yeah.
I think we're good.
Okay, well, let's see. Hopefully this all recorded. It says it's been recording.
Great.
That was great, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you for being so receptive to my schedule. I'm like,
oh,
right
no,
about
you're fine. I'm also going home tomorrow, so like I would have rather had this done today as well.
I feel good that we got this done early, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because I was like, oh, I'm like telling them they need to get half the book read done already. So good. Well, I'm glad we got to do it.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and upload this to YouTube. I don't know how long it'll take because I'm not sure how long this was. But then as soon as that's up, I'll send you guys the link on email, and then we can all turn in the assignment.
Thank you again, Jenna, for doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, girls. Be in touch next week.